Put your hands up. The words sliced through the peaceful, mundane hum of the supermarket air conditioning, sharp and cold as a razor's edge. In the fluorescent glare of aisle 7, surrounded by the cheerful, colorful boxes of breakfast cereal, the command was so out of place it felt like a glitch in reality. I said, "Put 'em up now." The voice cracked on the last word, a volatile mix of adolescent insecurity and unearned authority. This was Cedar Creek, Texas, a suburb just outside of Dallas where Saturdays were sacred, reserved for mowing lawns, watching college football, and the weekly grocery run to H-E-B. It was a place of community potlucks and Friday night lights. It was not a place for this. Not in the cereal aisle, wedged between a wall of Cheerios and a fortress of Frosted Flakes. Yet here he was, FBI Special Agent Marcus Vance, a 42-year-old man whose life had been a testament to discipline and the rule of law, was staring down the trembling barrel of a Glock 19, held by a local police officer who couldn't have been more than 23 years old. The officer's name tag read Miller. His face was flushed a blotchy, angry red, and his eyes, wide and darting, weren't seeing a man. They were seeing a threat he had conjured from a stew of prejudice and bad training. Marcus slowly, deliberately, raised his hands to shoulder height, palms open and forward. The movement was smooth, practiced, designed to convey compliance without showing fear. But inside, his mind was a whirlwind of tactical analysis, a cascade of training protocols honed over 2 decades in the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Okay, Marcus, breathe, assess the threat. Subject is a white male, early 20s. Stance is aggressive but unstable, feet too close together. He's broadcasting his nervousness. Finger is on the trigger guard, but resting on it, not indexed along the slide. Poor trigger discipline. That's dangerous. That's how accidental discharges happen. His weapon is shaking. He's scared. A scared man with a gun is a powder keg. What are my options? He could feel the eyes of other shoppers on him. A mother with 2 kids in her cart in the next aisle overfroze, her hand hovering over a box of Lucky Charms, before quickly and silently wheeling her cart away. A couple of teenagers near the dairy section were pretending to look at yogurts, but their phones were out, discreetly pointed in his direction. The humiliation was a physical sensation, a hot flush that started in his chest and crept up his neck. To be treated like this, like a common criminal in the very town he called home. "I did nothing wrong," Marcus said, his voice a low, steady baritone. He was fighting to keep it calm, to project an aura of reason into a situation rapidly spiraling into chaos. The adrenaline was a familiar roar in his ears, but he compartmentalized it. He'd faced down armed cartel enforcers in dusty border towns and cornered ruthless mobsters in darkened warehouses. But this felt different. This was a betrayal. "Officer, there has been a serious misunderstanding." Officer Cody Miller took a half-step forward, his boots squeaking on the polished linoleum. "Misunderstanding? You think I'm stupid?" He spat, his voice laced with contempt. "I see your type all the time, furtive, just wandering the aisles, not buying anything, looking for a chance to grab and run. Don't you dare lie to me. My type?" The phrase landed like a punch to the gut. "Furtive? I'm looking for the organic, gluten-free granola my wife asked for." The sheer absurdity of it would have been laughable in any other context. But here, with a gun aimed at his sternum, it wasn't funny at all. He was being profiled, blatantly, aggressively, and dangerously. "Officer," Marcus tried again, keeping his hands exactly where they were. "I am a citizen of this town. I live not 2 miles from here. I am shopping for my family." Miller scoffed, a short, ugly sound. "Yeah, right. You don't look like you belong in this neighborhood. Where are you really from?" The question was a classic, loaded with insinuation. Marcus felt a flicker of the hot anger that he had learned to master long ago. His patience, a deep and usually unshakable well, was beginning to run dry. "I've lived in this state my whole life. My kids go to school here. Now, I'm going to ask you again. Why am I being detained?" "Because you're suspicious," Miller yelled, his voice rising in pitch. "And now you're getting argumentative. That's even more suspicious. I want to see your ID. Now. This was the critical point. Marcus knew his rights as a citizen. In Texas, you are only required to identify yourself if you have been lawfully arrested. A police officer can ask for your ID during a lawful detention, but that detention must be based on reasonable suspicion that you have committed, are committing, or are about to commit a crime. Shopping for cereal did not meet that standard. With all due respect, officer, you have no reasonable suspicion, and therefore no legal cause to demand my identification, Marcus stated, his voice now taking on the firm, precise tone of a man who knew the law better than the officer pointing a gun at him. For Officer Miller, this was the ultimate challenge. This calm, articulate response from the man he had already judged as a low-life criminal was a direct affront to his authority. It didn't compute. In his worldview, people like Marcus were supposed to be scared, subservient, or belligerently guilty. This man's composure was, to Miller, irrefutable proof that he was hiding something. The flush on his face deepened to a furious crimson. Are you resisting an officer? Is that what you're doing? You're resisting. Miller's voice cracked under the strain. He took another step forward, closing the distance until the barrel of his Glock was only a few feet from Marcus's chest. The metallic scent of gun oil faintly cut through the sugary smell of cereal. This is the precipice, Marcus thought. He's lost rational control. He's cornered himself emotionally, and he sees challenging his authority as the only way out. Revealing my FBI credentials now is a high-risk gamble. It could shock him into compliance, or it could make a scared, angry kid with a gun feel threatened by a higher authority and cause him to pull the trigger. I need a different path. The third option. One he can't argue with. One that will not just end this, but hold him accountable for it. And then it came to him. The one name that could cut through this entire mess like a hot knife through butter. The one man in the world who could defuse this situation with a single phone call. His best friend. To truly understand the impossible tension of that moment in aisle 7, you need to rewind the clock. Not by minutes, but by decades. You need to go back to a younger Cedar Creek, a town that was little more than a dusty spot on the map, long before the sprawling suburbs of Dallas reached it. It was a place of cracked asphalt basketball courts where the summer heat radiated upwards in shimmering waves. It was on one of those courts, under a relentless Texas sun, that the unlikeliest of friendships was forged. Marcus Vance, a lanky, quiet kid from the small, predominantly black neighborhood on the east side of the tracks, and Frank Bryant, a scrappy, loudmouthed white kid whose father was a mechanic, were an odd pair. But on the basketball court, they were a unit. Marcus had the graceful, strategic mind, seeing plays before they happened. Frank had the raw, dogged determination, willing to dive for any loose ball. They bonded over cheap sodas after a game, over shared dreams of getting out and making something of themselves, and over a fundamental, unspoken understanding of fairness. They had each other's backs. Always. Their high school graduation was a fork in the road. Frank, whose family couldn't afford college, stayed in Cedar Creek. He saw the local police department not just as a steady job, but as a way to bring order and fairness to the town he loved. He joined the force with a fiery idealism, determined to be a different kind of cop, one who knew the community, who treated people with respect, regardless of which side of the tracks they came from. He worked his way up, slowly but surely, from patrolman to detective to captain, and eventually, through a combination of grit, integrity, and the universal respect he commanded, he became Chief of Police Frank Bryant. He was known as a tough but fair leader, a man who held his officers to the highest standards and had zero tolerance for cowboys or bullies. Marcus's path led him far away. Fueled by a burning sense of justice, he worked 2 jobs to put himself through the University of Texas, graduating with honors. His goal was singular, the FBI. He pushed himself through the brutal physical and mental crucible of Quantico, emerging as a special agent. His career was a highlight reel of high-stakes operations. He spent years undercover infiltrating a Russian organized crime ring in Brooklyn, learning to think and act like the very monsters he was hunting. He led the tactical team that brought down a human trafficking network operating out of Houston. He was part of the task force that unraveled a complex counterterrorism plot in Chicago. He was respected throughout the bureau as a man who was cool under pressure, meticulous in his planning, and unshakable in his resolve. He had seen the absolute worst of humanity, but it never managed to extinguish his belief in the system he served. Throughout all those years, through different cities and divergent lives, Marcus and Frank's bond never broke. They talked on the phone late at night, traded stories about their wildly different worlds, and met up for a beer whenever Marcus was back in Texas. Frank respected the hell out of the man Marcus had become, a symbol of everything he believed law enforcement should be. And Marcus saw in Frank a shining example of a good man doing a tough job right. Just 6 months ago, after 20 years away, Marcus had been offered a senior supervisory position at the FBI's Dallas field office. It was a chance to finally put down roots, to give his wife and 2 kids a stable life, to come home. Moving back to a bigger, more developed Cedar Creek felt like the perfect end to a long journey. He bought a house in a quiet cul-de-sac, just a few miles from Frank's. Their kids played together. They were planning a fishing trip. Life was good. It was peaceful. And it was that peace, that hard-won sense of normalcy, that was being shattered by a young cop with a chip on his shoulder and hate in his heart. In the middle of the breakfast cereal aisle, the man Officer Miller saw was a nameless, faceless stereotype. The man he was pointing his gun at was a federal agent, a decorated veteran in the war on crime, a husband, a father, and the best friend of his own chief of police. Miller had no idea of the hornet's nest he was not just poking, but kicking with all his might. The consequences of this single, terrible decision were about to come crashing down upon him with the force of a freight train. Back in the suffocating tension of aisle 7, Marcus made his decision. His mind, trained for high-stakes gambles, calculated the odds. This was the only move left on the board. "Officer," Marcus said again, his voice dropping to a tone that was both a statement and a command. "You seem to think I'm scared of you. You're wrong. The person you should be scared of is the one who's going to hold you accountable for this. You asked me if the chief was my buddy. As a matter of fact, he is." Miller's sneer was automatic, a reflex of his arrogance. "Oh yeah? You're friends with the chief? Who do you think you are?" "I think I'm the man who's about to call your boss, Chief Frank Bryant, and let him know that one of his officers is about to make a fatal mistake," Marcus said, his eyes piercing through Miller's bravado. "And trust me, he is not going to be happy." The name Frank Bryant, spoken with such calm certainty, was the first chink in Miller's armor. A flicker of doubt crossed his face. He knew the chief. Everyone on the force knew the chief's reputation. He was a straight arrow. He didn't play favorites, and he didn't tolerate misconduct. "Why, you're lying," Miller stammered, but the conviction in his voice was gone, replaced by a tremor of fear. "You're just saying that to get out of this." "Am I?" Marcus replied. "I'm going to lower my right hand now very slowly and take out my phone. I'm going to keep my hand in your line of sight the entire time." He moved with a deliberate, almost surgical slowness, his eyes never leaving Miller's. He reached into his jacket pocket, his fingers closing around the cool metal and glass of his cell phone. Miller stood frozen, a war raging behind his eyes. His training, what little he had absorbed, screamed at him that a suspect reaching for something was a threat. But his gut, now churning with icy dread, told him this was something else. He watched, paralyzed, as Marcus pulled out the phone. He watched as Marcus's thumb swiped across the screen, went to his favorites list, and pressed the very first name, Frank. The dialing tone echoed in the now deathly quiet aisle, felt impossibly loud. Ring, ring. In his office at the Cedar Creek Police Department, Chief Frank Bryant was reviewing budget proposals, a mountain of paperwork he despised. He saw the call coming in and smiled. "Hey, Marcus. What's up, man? You still on for Poker Friday?" he answered, his voice booming with casual friendliness. The sound of his chief's cheerful, familiar voice coming from the phone in Marcus's hand was what finally broke Officer Miller. The color drained from his face, leaving it a pasty, sickly white. He looked like he'd seen a ghost. "Hey, Frank," Marcus said, and the strain in his voice was unmistakable. It was the tight, controlled tone he used on tactical channels, not the relaxed one he used with his friend. "Listen, I'm at the HEB over on Main Street, aisle 7. I'm having a situation with one of your officers." On the other end of the line, Frank's entire demeanor shifted in a nanosecond. The friendly warmth vanished, replaced by the sharp, cold focus of a police chief. "A situation? What kind of situation? What officer?" "Officer Cody Miller," Marcus said, his gaze locking onto the young cop, who now looked like he was about to vomit. "He's decided I look suspicious. He's currently got his service weapon pointed at my chest because he didn't like the way I was shopping for cereal." There was a silence on the line. It was not a normal silence. It was a heavy, dense void that seemed to suck all the air out of the aisle. It lasted for 3 long, agonizing seconds. When Frank's voice returned, it was a low, dangerous growl, an earthquake rumbling just beneath the surface. It was a tone Marcus had heard him use only once or twice before, and both times it was directed at the worst kind of criminals. "He has a gun on you? Marcus, you stay right there. Do not move an inch. I am on my way. I will be there in 2 minutes." The line went dead. Marcus slowly, deliberately, put the phone back in his pocket. He just looked at Officer Miller, who was now trembling so violently that the gun in his hand was visibly shaking. Sweat was pouring down his temples. The arrogant bully of 5 minutes ago was gone, replaced by a terrified child who had just realized he had set his own house on fire. You really know the chief?" Miller whispered, his voice a pathetic, croaking sound. Marcus's expression was cold as stone. "I told you," he said, "and he's coming. I think you and I are going to have a very long, very detailed conversation with him." Less than 3 minutes later, the automatic doors of the HEB hissed open and Chief Frank Bryant strode inside. He wasn't in uniform, but he moved with an aura of absolute command that made people instinctively step out of his way. His face was a mask of cold fury. He scanned the store, his eyes finding the scene in aisle 7 instantly. He saw his best friend, his brother in all but blood, standing with his hands still partially raised in a posture of surrender. And he saw one of his own officers, pale and shaking, pointing a gun at him. For a moment, Frank's vision went red. He walked towards them, his steps heavy and purposeful, completely ignoring Miller at first. "Marcus," he said, his voice tight with concern. "Are you okay? Did he do anything to you?" "I'm fine, Frank," Marcus said, finally lowering his hands. "Just taken aback. Nothing but a stream of insults and a gun in my face." Then, and only then, did Chief Bryant turn his full, undivided attention to Officer Cody Miller. The look in his eyes was not just anger. It was a profound, withering disappointment. It was the look of a leader who had been betrayed. "Officer Miller," he began, his voice dangerously quiet. "What, in God's name, do you think you are doing pointing a weapon at Special Agent Marcus Vance of the Federal Bureau of Investigation?" Special Agent. Federal Bureau of Investigation. The words hung in the air, each one a hammer blow against Cody Miller's crumbling reality. It wasn't just the chief's best friend. He had drawn his weapon on a federal agent. The entire foundation of his prejudiced worldview, the neat little boxes where he put people, wasn't just cracked. It was obliterated. The man he had profiled as a common thief was a member of the most elite law enforcement agency in the country. The panic in his chest became a full-blown supernova of terror. "Chief, I Special Agent?" Miller stammered, his mind unable to process the sheer magnitude of his blunder. He looked from Frank's furious face to Marcus's stone-cold expression, then down at the Glock in his own shaking hand as if he'd never seen it before. I didn't know. I swear to God, Chief, I didn't know." Frank took a slow, menacing step forward, invading Miller's personal space. "You didn't know, or you didn't care to know," he snarled, his voice a low hiss of contempt. "You saw a black man, and you threw your training, your oath, and your common sense out the window. You acted on your own disgusting prejudice. You abused your authority, you terrorized a citizen in the middle of a grocery store, and you disgraced the badge that I gave you." You pointed a deadly weapon at an innocent man, a federal agent, for no reason other than the fact that you didn't like the color of his skin. The public shaming was brutal and absolute. The few remaining onlookers were now watching in stunned silence. This was not a quiet word in the office. This was a public execution of a career. "Give me your weapon," Frank commanded, his voice leaving no room for argument. "Now, holster it slowly, then hand me the entire belt. Then your badge. And your radio. You are suspended, effective immediately. 2 other officers are on their way in. They will escort you back to the station. You will go directly to my office, you will sit there, and you will not speak to anyone until I get there. Do you understand me?" Nodding dumbly, his body moving on autopilot, Miller fumbled to comply. His hands were shaking so badly he could barely work the clasp on his duty belt. He unclipped his badge, the small piece of polished metal suddenly feeling like it weighed 100 pounds. Tears of pure, selfish fear were now streaming down his face, mixing with the sweat. "Chief, please," he sobbed, turning his desperate gaze to Marcus. "Agent Vance, I am so sorry. I was wrong, please. I have a family." Marcus looked at the weeping, broken man before him, and he felt nothing. Not pity, not anger, not even satisfaction. Just a profound, hollow disappointment. This apology wasn't for the humiliation or the danger he had put Marcus in. It was for himself. It was the desperate plea of a man who had just lost everything and was only now realizing it. As 2 uniformed officers arrived and quietly led the disgraced Miller away, Frank put a heavy hand on Marcus's shoulder. He looked exhausted, the anger on his face now replaced by a deep, weary sadness. "Marcus, I don't even know what to say. I am so sorry you had to go through that. In my town, by one of my men. I can't believe it." "It's not on you, Frank," Marcus said, though the sting of the encounter was still fresh. "But you have a cancer in your department. You know that, right? He did this to me, a federal agent with the chief of police on speed dial. Now, imagine what he has done or what he would do to some 19-year-old kid from the east side who gets pulled over and doesn't have the resources to fight back. That's what keeps me up at night." Frank's jaw tightened, his eyes grim. "I know," he said softly, "and I promise you, I will cut it out. This investigation will be swift, it will be thorough, and it will be final. This kind of rot has no place here. It ends today." True to his word, the moment Frank returned to the station, he launched an immediate and top-priority internal affairs investigation. He handed the case to his most trusted IA commander, a veteran detective known for being impartial and absolutely ruthless when it came to police misconduct. The investigation was an open-and-shut case. The evidence was a mountain. First, there was the witness testimony from Special Agent Marcus Vance. With the cool, dispassionate professionalism of a career investigator, Marcus provided a detailed, minute-by-minute account of the incident. He recounted Miller's exact words, including the racially charged insults, his aggressive demeanor, and the unjustifiable drawing of his weapon. But the nail in his coffin, the irrefutable, undeniable truth, came from the HEBS state-of-the-art security camera system. The high-definition video, captured from 3 different angles, was damning. It showed everything. Miller's aggressive, unprovoked approach. Marcus standing calmly with his hands on his shopping cart. The escalating argument, clear even without audio through their body language. The shocking, sudden moment Miller drew his weapon on a man who was doing nothing more than standing still. It captured Marcus's slow, deliberate movements to get his phone, and Miller's panicked, crumbling demeanor as the reality of the situation dawned on him. The video didn't just support Marcus's story, it proved it beyond any shadow of a doubt. It was a textbook case of abuse of power, racial profiling, and brandishing a deadly weapon without cause. The IA report was completed in record time. The conclusion was brutal and direct. Officer Cody Miller had violated multiple departmental policies, including unprofessional conduct, abuse of authority, and unreasonable use of force. The recommendation was the highest form of discipline possible: termination. The disciplinary review board hearing was a formality, but a necessary one. It was held in a sterile conference room at the police department. At the head of the long table sat Chief Frank Bryant, his face grim and resolute. Flanking him were the IA commander and two other senior captains from the department. Cody Miller sat at the other end of the table with his union-appointed attorney, looking pale and gaunt. The arrogance he had displayed in the supermarket aisle was gone, replaced by the hollow-eyed look of a man awaiting his sentence. The IA commander presented the findings of the investigation, methodically and dispassionately. He detailed Miller's policy violations, he read witness statements, and then he played the security footage on a large screen for the board to see. The video played in silence, but it screamed with injustice. The board watched intently as Miller's career-ending mistake unfolded in crystal-clear HD. Special Agent Vance, as the victim, chose not to attend the hearing in person. He wanted to avoid any appearance of a personal vendetta or of using his friendship with the chief to influence the outcome. Instead, he submitted a formal written statement. It was a powerful, masterfully written document. He didn't just describe the incident. He dissected it. He wrote about the profound sense of humiliation and betrayal he felt, being treated like a criminal in the town he considered his sanctuary. But he quickly pivoted from the personal to the professional. He emphasized the immense danger that an officer like Miller poses to the community. He argued that such behavior completely erodes the public's trust in law enforcement, a trust that is already so fragile. An officer who acts on prejudice, he wrote, is not just a bad apple. He is a poison that contaminates the entire orchard. He concluded his statement with a simple, powerful sentence. An officer with the attitude and behavior demonstrated by Officer Miller does not deserve to wear the badge and be entrusted with the responsibility of protecting and serving the public. He is a liability, not an asset, to the community and to the profession of law enforcement. Miller's attorney tried his best. He argued that Miller was young, inexperienced, and had made a terrible mistake under stress, conveniently ignoring the fact that Miller had single-handedly created the stressful situation. He pleaded for a lesser punishment like a lengthy suspension and mandatory retraining. He painted a picture of a young man with a family whose life would be ruined. When the attorney finished, Frank looked down the table at Miller. "Do you have anything to say for yourself, son?" Miller looked up, his eyes pleading. "Chief, I am so sorry. I know I was wrong. I was scared. I let my assumptions get the better of me. It was the biggest mistake of my life. I promise you it will never happen again. Please, just give me another chance." Frank listened, his expression unreadable. He then looked at the other members of the board. The decision was already made. It was unanimous. He cleared his throat and his voice filled the silent room. "Officer Mark Jenkins's conduct," he began, his voice firm and unwavering, "was a serious core violation of this department's code of ethics and policies. His unreasonable use of deadly force, blatant abuse of authority, and clear racial bias demonstrate his unfitness to serve as a police officer. Therefore, the board's resolution is as follows. Officer Mark Jenkins is terminated from the Maywood Police Department, effective immediately." The finality of the words seemed to suck the air out of Miller's lungs. He sat there, white-faced, completely devastated. He had lost everything. His job, his career, his reputation. His belated, self-serving apologies were meaningless. Justice, in this case, had been swift and absolute. Later that evening, Marcus was sitting on his back porch, staring out at the yard where his kids' toys were scattered. He heard footsteps and looked up to see Frank walking across the lawn, holding 2 cold beers. He handed one to Marcus and sat down in the chair next to him. They sat in silence for a few minutes, the only sound the chirping of crickets. "I still can't shake it," Frank said finally, his voice quiet. "The thought of what could have happened in that aisle. If you hadn't been who you are. If you hadn't kept your cool. If he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to." "But it didn't, Frank," Marcus said, taking a long drink of his beer. "And it didn't because you did the right thing. Swiftly, decisively. You didn't hide it, you didn't cover it up. You held your man accountable. That's what matters. It shouldn't take a phone call to the chief of police to get that kind of accountability," Frank said, a bitter edge to his voice. "No, it shouldn't," Marcus agreed, looking at his friend. But today it did, and it worked. Now the hard part begins. Making sure that same justice is there for everyone. For the kid who doesn't have the chief on speed dial. For the person who doesn't know their rights. That's the real fight. The story of Special Agent Marcus Vance is a powerful and uncomfortable reminder that racial bias and the abuse of power are not abstract concepts. They are real dangers that can turn a simple trip for groceries into a life-or-death situation. It exposes the terrifying reality of what happens when prejudice clouds the judgment of those entrusted to protect the public. But it is also a story of integrity. It's a story of a friendship built on mutual respect that transcended race and uniform. And ultimately, it's a story about the profound importance of accountability, proving that when good people in positions of power have the courage to act, justice doesn't just have to be a dream. It can be a reality. This entire incident raises so many crucial questions for all of us. What do you believe is the most effective way to address and root out deep-seated prejudice within our law enforcement agencies? Do you think Officer Miller's immediate termination was the correct and fair decision? Or should there have been a different path? And most importantly, what can we, as a community, do to prevent officers like Cody Miller from ever being given a badge and a gun in the first place? Share your thoughts and your feelings in the comments section below. Your voice and your perspective are a vital part of this ongoing and necessary conversation. Thank you for watching. The most chilling lesson from that HEB aisle isn't just that prejudice exists. It's how terrifyingly thin the veil of safety is for anyone. One moment you're a citizen, a neighbor, a dad picking up groceries under the familiar Texas sun. The next, you're a target, judged not by your actions but by a stranger's deepest biases. Your life dangling by the thread of their unstable emotions. Marcus Vance was a decorated FBI agent, a man who hunted the worst criminals. Yet his credentials were made worthless by one officer's bigotry. His salvation didn't come from the system he served, but from a personal Connect-Iona friendship forged on a dusty basketball court decades ago. The ultimate takeaway is a stark and uncomfortable one. Justice shouldn't be a privilege of the well-connected. Accountability shouldn't require having the police chief on speed dial. It's a brutal reminder that a system is only a collection of people, and without constant vigilance and unwavering integrity from those within it, that system can fail anyone at any time, even in the cereal aisle. We saw Marcus Vance use his unique connections to find justice, but it forces us to ask a difficult question about the reality most people face. If you were in his shoes, racially profiled, staring down the barrel of a gun, but without the police chief on speed dial, what would your next move be? What does a story like this truly reveal about the nature of power, prejudice, and accountability in our communities today? We want to hear your honest thoughts and experiences. Share your perspective in the comments below, and if this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it so we can continue this vital conversation together.